If you weren't here in the first week, we talked about William Bradford and about his history of the Plymouth Plantation and how they knew they were pilgrims. They had the pilgrims had been persecuted by the Church of England and had fled to Holland and then to Plymouth, where it went through extreme circumstances. And we talked about how their faith in God and their all of the overlap of what Thanksgiving truly is for us. Last week we looked at William Brewster's letter as he wrote back describing the first Thanksgiving, and we saw in that letter, the first Thanksgiving, a very good parallel to Deuteronomy 26, where the feast of the Jewish people celebrated the Feast of the Harvest and how they celebrated God, and they a lot of the same elements in a lot of the same ways, and how that was a pattern. Scripture was a pattern for them, and how they're a pattern for us. And I was really actually aggravated with myself because I ran out of pilgrim stories for you, and I don't have a pilgrim story for you today. And I apologize for that. I thought I'd have enough material, but instead I'll tell you about another guy. This guy's name is Squanto. And Squanto has a very fascinating story. I want to encourage you to go and do some reading on him and look him up. But Squanto, I think a lot of us get like a paragraph or a sentence in a paragraph in a history book in the third grade. Right? And that's about all we know about Squanto. But Squanto's story really starts at about 1605 when he travels with a British captain over to England. He does a little tour, kind of shows him off a little bit. And he comes back in 1608 to the Americas. And on his arrival, we're not really sure exactly how it happened. History's got a couple different theories on how it happened, but here is Squanto, and he is with some friends perhaps on the beach, and they're looking for lobster. Other histories say, well, they went on board the ship and were caught. But in 1608, a guy by the name of Thomas Hunt kidnapped Squanto, three of his friends, as well as about 27 total Native Americans, and took them to Spain to sell as slaves. Now, Thomas Hunt was a lieutenant to John Smith, and so you have the very clear distinction. I want to draw this real quick. It's kind of going to break up the story, but I think it helps us a little bit as we try to grab this overall story. There was Jamestown, and there was Plymouth. You had two separate colonies to which we as Americans can go back and say, that's where America began. Either America began in Jamestown or America began in Plymouth. But we look at Plymouth and we see the Pilgrims and we see the spiritual heritage. What we have in Jamestown is a bunch of private enterprise. We have a bunch of people who came to set up a colony in order that they could trade with the natives and that they could, in some cases, unfortunately, as it was with Thomas Hunt, to actually kidnap. The Bible calls that man-stealing, and sell them into slavery. So he somehow captures Squanto, takes him to Spain, and begins to set up a slave auction in a certain village. And in the process of selling those Native Americans as slaves, the histories differ between whether it was a friar or a monk. It really doesn't matter. It was a Christian. Comes along and sees what's going on here and purchases Squanto out of slavery. So rather than him being bought by a slave taskmaster, he's bought by a monk or a friar who brings him into his dwelling, his home or monastery, and begins to teach him the Bible, begins to teach him the gospel, he begins to learn the Spanish language. No doubt he probably learned a little bit of Latin as well as English. And Squanto, now having been sold as a slave, was redeemed back by a man of God who then begins to pour into him the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so here is Squanto, and he is longing to go back to his village, to his people, to his parents and his family and his friends. And so they after about 5 years of education, he goes to England. He is there in England, in the home of a guy by the name of John Slaney. John Slaney was a merchantman who was making trips at this time back and forth from England to Newfoundland, Canada. I heard we had some Canadians. Where are you Canadians? Over here somewhere? A couple of y'all over here. We had some in the first service too. They, that's Justin Trudeau calling. He's wanting you to come back. He wants you to hurry back and pay your taxes, is what it is. The only problem I have with the Canadians is you celebrate Thanksgiving in October. So once you guys square that away, then we can merge the two countries. We'll be good to go. But so here he is, and he's on this merchant trip back to Newfoundland, but it's not close enough quite to get home. He's there for a year, and then he's able to return home. So if you think about this, he's now been gone from his village for 10 years about. And he's arriving back to his village 1 year prior to the pilgrims. And so here he comes back on the scene. No doubt if you were him, you would hit the beach running, right? And you would go running back to your village to find mom or dad or brother or sister. And he arrives at the village, and the village 6 months earlier had been totally wiped out by disease. Likely smallpox, also brought by the Europeans. Devastated. Squanto, in a lot of ways, he's the last of the Mohicans, although he wasn't a Mohican. He was a Patuxent Indian. So he's the last of his people. And he goes and he lives on his own out in the woods, and he's there, and he teams up with a guy by the name of Samoset, who was also he had some familiarity with. Samoset also spoke English, and they began to live in another village with another tribe of Indians, and they were these two guys who really didn't belong. Their people were gone, and they were now living in this other village, and word comes to him that now some Europeans have taken up residence in the remains of his old village. A bunch of Europeans that we call pilgrims had moved in. In fact, in Bradford's history, he says that they built their homes on the bones of the natives. In just a very descriptive way. They were barely dead and out by the time the pilgrims arrived. And I don't know, just my conjecture, but I wonder if some of their death from disease that first year was maybe just some leftover stuff that the natives had died from not too long prior to that. But in this amazing relationship begins when he comes back to his village. And up until this point, the natives had not had good contact with the pilgrims, or should I say the other way around? The pilgrims had not had good interactions with the natives. And so here are the pilgrims, and they're in their village, and they can feel, they know they're being watched every day while they're working in their fields. They know that at any moment arrows might fly. And so here they are, they're going about life, and all of a sudden into their village, into Squanto's village comes Squanto, and in a perfect British accent. Where are my British people? I had some British people, I know. Some over here and one or two over here. In a perfect British accent, he says, "Welcome, Englishmen," which had to blow their minds, right? So here comes the Native American out of the woods, and he's like, "Welcome, Englishmen." And he begins to teach them how to live, because they weren't really prepared how to live. They were starving to death because they weren't farmers. And they come to a new place, and they just felt like they could just set up shop and live. And so he begins to teach them how to plant corn, and how to plant corn and plant fish along with the corn that would fertilize the corn. And he begins to live amongst them. And that village that was once his village is now his village again, but it's just different villagers. And it's not the people of his history, now it's the people of his faith. And so he's living amongst them, and he begins to interact with some of the neighboring tribes. And there's this one tribe that's pretty much the large and in charge in this general area. And their chief is a guy by the name of Massasoit. And so Squanto makes a peace treaty with Massasoit that lasts 50 years. One that would outlive himself. And when he passed away, Bradford said this. He said, "Squanto fell ill of Indian fever. bleeding much at the nose, which the Native American take as a symbol of death. Within a few days, he died. He begged the governor to pray for him, that he might go to the Englishman's God in heaven, and bequeathed several of his things to his English friends as remembrances. His death was a great loss. Now, you can say that America is about capitalism and it's about the free market system, and it's about the economy, and it's about the end justifying the means. And Jamestown can be the start of our nation. But there was a guy who 200 years later, 200 plus years later, and in the 1860s would make our national holiday this Thanksgiving, because really what America is about a bunch of religious pilgrims and a bunch of freed slaves working together out of many, one, trusting in God and gathering together to give God thanks. If there's a very American holiday, I don't know that it's necessarily the 4th of July. I don't know that it's necessarily Christmas. But I would say it would be Thanksgiving. It would be this time where we come out of our differences. That first Thanksgiving they gathered, they were celebrating, and at this point, Squanto brings along Massasoit and 90 other natives with them, and they bring deer to the party, and the pilgrims go out and they shoot some fowl, maybe some turkeys. We don't know necessarily if they were turkeys or not, but we believe they were. And here we have this tremendous Thanksgiving, and it's just a myriad of bunch of people who come together to just recognize, to give God thanks. And I wonder if Squanto is not the hero of Thanksgiving. Here's a person who had every reason to reject the Europeans. They had done him dirty, no doubt, especially Hunt. He comes back to his village and all his people, and he could be bitter and he could be angry, but because of the forgiveness of Jesus Christ, he forgives, and he comes and he lends a hand. And they say that first year, because of Squanto, they went from a diet of 3 kernels of corn a day, about what they found in the village, right? That's what they found that was left over from before. They went from a diet of 3 kernels of corn a day to that first year's harvest, 20 acres of corn they were able to grow that first year. And so they had this massive celebration. And here's the thing. They had so little. They had gone through so much. And yet they were so thankful. And what's really been bothering me this month is I don't think I'm as thankful as they are. Yet I have so much more. That there is this crazy thing that the more we have, the less thankful we are. The more blessed we are, the more opulent our lifestyles, the more we've got, the less we give thanks. And yet here they are in total privation. And here we sit in total privilege. Privilege is a new term, right? It's thrown around. It's kind of a byword now. You attach a color to it, or you attach an age to it, or you attach a certain level of income to it, or certain job status, and all of a sudden you have these people who are privileged. Let me scrape the varnish off this. Every last one of us are privileged. I'm going to say something that's going to be rude, but I'm going to say it anyway. I have never met a homeless person without a phone. We don't have desperate people, because even our most desperate people are so blessed. The reality is that we have this problem of privilege. And the privilege is a sworn enemy of gratitude. Privilege hangs out with the idea of entitlement. Privilege is best friends with dissatisfaction. Do you remember when you had 3 channels on TV? Do you now have 1,000 channels on TV and there's nothing to watch? All right, so you get it. The more you have, the less you appreciate. And I want to give us a little bit of insight into this problem that we have, because it's a problem all of us have. That the richer we are, the less thankful we are. When you would think it would work opposite of that, it actually is upside down. We're backwards. We're broken people. The more blessed we are, the less thankful we are. I got two principles before we get to our scripture today, I want to give you 2 principles that I think describe this. Principle number 1, that in order for us to properly give thanks, we need a right view of how big a distress we are in. We don't know how bad we are. We don't know how much trouble we are in. And the more trouble we know we're in, the better job we are at giving thanks. For instance, level 1, we'll call this small. You have a small problem. You're carrying boxes towards the door, right? You get to the door, somebody sees your need, and they do this. They open the door for you to walk right past them. Should you tell them thank you? Yes, absolutely yes. You should thank them. That was a very nice thing of them to do. They're giving of their time. They didn't have to do it. They saw your need. They met your need. You should tell them thank you. But that's a small need, right? Just somebody to open a door for you. Let's kick it up to medium-sized need. Medium-sized need, we're going to say, is a kidney. There are people that they need kidneys. Right? We were talking about that earlier, right? Kidneys. Kidneys, man, kidneys. A kidney is a medium-sized need because there's a larger need. Somebody saves your life. You're drowning in the ocean, and somebody jumps off a bridge, swims out to you, and puts you in a headlock of a life-saving move to drag you back to shore. That's better than a kidney. We're going to call that a large need. You had a large need. You were drowning. You were going to die without their action. If someone opens the door for them, you owe them a nice thank you. If somebody gives you a kidney, you owe them a really nice thank you. Right? If somebody saves your life, that's a big deal. Your gratitude increases with each one. The more trouble you're in, the bigger your gratitude should be. Right? I want to kick it up one more notch. There's a problem, a distress that we can sometimes get into where it moves from a matter of life and death to something bigger than life and death. And I know that the initial reaction is to push back and say, well, life and death is the worst, but this is an existential problem. This is your everything. There are people who are in our armed services who defend our nation that risk their life for something greater than themselves. And there are some who die and have given their life for something greater than their life. That everything that mattered to them was greater than their life. That's even bigger than someone giving their life to save your life. The reality as we look at it, if we really want to have high, extra large gratitude, the way to get to that gratitude is a full understanding of how desperate we are. All right, principle number 2. In order to have a proper view of gratitude, you don't need to know just how bad you got it, but how much it costs the person who did the favor for you for the remedy. For instance, if somebody opened the door for you, that cost them some time, some effort. We would categorize small as time and money. Like you go into a convenience store and you're short, and there's a little dish there that says, need a penny, take a penny, right? So it didn't cost them a whole lot. You got some leftover change. You really don't want it in your getting sticky in your ashtray that you never use anymore. And so you just drop it off there and leave it for the next guy, and it's no big deal. You don't care. It's not a lot. And so you give a little. It doesn't cost you anything. And then you get medium size. You give somebody a kidney. Right? That's a big deal, but it costs you pain and suffering. And then it's where you give your life to somebody. You lay down your life as a soldier, as a rescue agent of rescue, and you may give your life to rescue, say the people in the trade towers on 9/11, those heroes that will give their life in exchange for another. And then there is that person or that event where there's an existential gift, where they give their everything for someone else. It's something we don't ever really get to very often, but there's this ability to say, you know what, I'm going to give not just my life, but my all. And in order to understand this, I want you to see the story of Abraham. And I think it more than anything, to me, it speaks of this. It's the central story of all the Old Testament. And the story of Abraham is really what sets the stage for all of Judaism and Christianity and even Islam, to be fair. And Abram was called out of Ur the Chaldees. He's an old man. He begins to obey God, and God says, Abram, I'm going to make of you a great nation. I'm going to change your name from Abram to Abraham, which means father. The problem was Abram and Sarah had no kids. Abram gets to be 100 years old. His wife Sarah is 90 years old, and God gives them Isaac. Then God does the unthinkable. He says, Abram, or Abraham, I want you to sacrifice Isaac to me as a burnt offering. The ultimate test, right? It's not a small test, it's an existential test. Because Isaac was his whole life. It was who he was. It was how he was defined. It was his name. He was the son of his old age. And so God says, I want you to sacrifice him. So here's Abraham. And he leaves. He gets up early one morning and he puts his belongings on the donkey, and he brings 2 servants and his little boy along with him. And they go 3 days journey into the wilderness to the bottom of the mountain. He leaves the servants behind, and he starts to walk his little guy up the side of the mountain. And Isaac is looking around. He's like, okay, Dad, I see the wood and I see the fire, but where's the burnt offering? Where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham says this, God will provide himself a lamb for the offering. And so here they go, and no doubt the most treacherous, the most heart-wrenching, the most difficult journey of anyone's life. And he gets up there, they build the altar, they lay out the wood, and he ties up his son, and he puts his son on the altar, and he raises the knife to the sky. And at this moment, he's going to decide whether God is his everything or whether Isaac is his everything. And that's not a fair question. But as he brings down the knife, God, Abraham, Abraham, and God provides over in the thicket, caught by its horn, is a ram. And he frees his son, and the ram becomes the replacement offering there. And in that very moment, Abraham was in the biggest distress, right? He could, it wasn't just something casual that God did. I mean, this met his greatest need. He has his son there. He had another illegitimate son Ishmael, which was the child of him and a slave girl, as they were trying to circumvent God and do it their own way, and it's another story for another time. But he had already kicked them out and sent them out in the wilderness, and so it wasn't just a matter of Isaac's life; it was a matter of that. No doubt, he would have given his own life. He's like, I've lived a good life. I'm 100 years old. Lord, take me. I think every parent in the room, well, most of you at least, are good enough parents, where you'd be willing to say, hey, Lord, take me, not my kid. But this Isaac represented the existential greatest need that anybody could ever have. Now, pop quiz for you. Did the ram represent a small, medium, large, or extra large need for God? Was a ram something big for God to do? Easy peasy. Right? He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. The ram was like nothing. No cost. God's like, that's like a penny. It cost God nothing. But what it represented was something greater. So that ram that was there was a picture of the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. Jesus Christ, God's Son, who would be given as a ransom for us, represents to us God's most existential gift. The greatest gift that God ever could give was Jesus. Right? And God's greatest gift meets us at the point of our greatest need. The reason we struggle with gratitude is we take our distress and we take His gift for granted. We're like, it's not that big a deal. Mistakes, I've had a few. Then again, too few to mention. We just don't think we're that bad of sinners. We don't understand separation from God. We don't understand how much trouble we're in as sinful people. Likewise, we don't understand how good God is and how much God was willing to give for us, how we are not even ants on His planet. But yet He chose to give His greatest gift for our salvation. And so it's in that context that I want us to look today at a psalm of thanksgiving, Psalm 100. And really wrestle with this idea of how can we nurture more thankfulness in our life. If we know that our nature, the nature of our problem, the nature of us is privilege, and because of that privilege, we're not as grateful as we used to be, how can we get back to a place where we're nurturing a Thanksgiving life? I told the first service, I forgot to mention this last week, and I don't think I did it in this service either, but gratitude is not an attitude. Gratitude is an action. Right? We got this attitude of gratitude little catchphrase because it rhymes. But gratitude is, for you to hold the door for me while I'm carrying a bunch of boxes, not okay for me just in my mind to say, well, that was really nice of them. Right? It's got to go beyond that. So gratitude is not an attitude, it's an action. And so how can we nurture thanksgiving in our life? How can we go about nurturing this idea of thanksgiving? Would you stand with me in honor of God's word? We're in Psalm 100. Scripture says this. It says, make a joyful shout to the Lord, all you lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before His presence with singing. Know that the Lord, He is God. It is He who has made us, and not we ourselves. We are His people and the sheep of His pasture. Enter into His gates with thanksgiving and into His courts with praise. Be thankful to Him and bless His name. For the Lord is good. His mercy is everlasting, and His truth endures to all generations. You may be seated. The first thing I want us to look at today is the location. One of the things that will help us to get better at being thankful is to pay attention to our location. Twice in this passage, once in verse 2 and once in verse 4, where we have location given. It says we are to come into his presence or before his presence with singing. So it's the presence of God. Later on in verse 4, it says we are to enter into his gates with thanksgiving. So here we come in and we are in the presence of God. We are within his gates. We are around him. The more that you are around God, the more that you enter into his presence, the more you will be aware of your sinfulness and your desperation. The more you will be aware of his awesomeness and his holiness and his power. So if you are struggling with gratitude, one of the ways that you can remedy that is by spending more time with God. Like, go to church today. Did you go to church today? Pat yourself on the back. Yeah. Here's the reality. You, in the presence of God, gives you a remarkable understanding of your frailty. A remarkable understanding of your sinfulness. Some of the concepts that were in examples when people came into the presence of God in the Bible, they would stand before him and they would be like, oh, "Depart from me, for I am a wicked man." Or I am what did Isaiah say? I am a man of unclean lips. I don't belong here. That when you enter into God's presence, the one thing that stands out to you is how other he is. He is so foreign. He's so alien to us. We are so human. We are so broken. We are so sinful. We're so frail that when we spend time with God, we all of a sudden become aware of how amazing he is and how awesome he is and how different we are from that. And we begin to understand our distress. Then, like those pilgrims, like Squanto, like so many others through the generations, we have an understanding of gratitude that exceeds where we're at today. It's a matter of spending time with God. Max Lucado is one of my favorite authors. He was a missionary in Brazil. He tells a story of walking through the town where he was there, and he was on his way to the college where he was going to teach a Bible class. And if you've ever been in the third world, you understand the concept of street children. There are these children who live on the streets. They live by the streets. They are really good at hustling. They're really good at being helpful to tourists. So in this particular area where he was doing his work, there were a lot of street children. In fact, between walking from his house to the college, he would experience so many of them that he developed a habit of just kind of keeping his eyes straight ahead because he couldn't be distracted. He couldn't stop to help one because then all of a sudden he was in trouble. Because he can't help all of them. And so he would feel guilty about that. And so he got in the habit of not helping any of them. But this one little guy comes along, and there was just something different. I don't know whether it was the way he approached him or whether it was the look in the kid's eye or the tenor of his voice, but the kid said, "Sir, can I have some bread?" And he said at that moment his heart broke. And although he was late to work, he brought the boy along with him into a coffee shop, and he ordered a cup of coffee. And he said to the guy behind the counter, "Go ahead and give him one of the pastries, whatever he wants. Let him choose, and then I'll pay for it." He paid for him. He walked over, and he begins to make his coffee. And he turns to go back to his table, and the kid is at the table. And as he describes it, that they would never stay behind. As soon as they got what they wanted, they would always run off, and they would always scurry away. And they would always, take what they got and just run off and eat it or show it off to the other kids or whatever. And yet there was something different about this little boy. He stayed behind at the table. And he says, he came back to the table and the little boy told him, "Thank you." And he said, "At that moment, I would have given him every pastry in the shop." What that kid did differently is he didn't take his gift and leave. He took his gift and stayed in the presence of the one who gave it. And there's just something about Thanksgiving and something about understanding the presence of God that when we gather together, we enter into His presence with singing, and we enter into His gates with thanksgiving. We come to his table. And this week, many of us will celebrate Thanksgiving, and no doubt there will be some who will be separated from their families. Not everybody's going to gather together, and you're going to have that ache and that miss. I wish so-and-so were at the table today, and I wish so-and-so were here. And the reality is that's exactly what God desires for you. God desires you to be in his gates. He desires you to come home. He desires you to be with him to celebrate. He's given everything for you. He gave everything for you in his presence. So when we gather in his presence, we glorify God, and God enjoys having us. We dine at his table, and the question stands before us is, when's the last time we made time for God? When's the last time we made time for God's presence? We open our Bible and we spend some time with him, or we bow our head and we spend some time with him. We gather and we just start to sing and worship. We go on a walk and we just experience the presence of God. And that if we are going to develop a gratitude that's stronger than what we have right now, we've got to spend a lot more time in the presence of God and in his location. But it's not just the location. Secondly, it's the declaration. So we're in his location, we're with him, but we also make some declarations. Look at this passage, verse 1. The Bible says, make a joyful... You guys didn't do it either. I thought somebody in this service would. The first service, they all whispered it. Like, I expected somebody to shout it. We're to make a joyful shout. Hey, there you go. Can you imagine being the obnoxious guy at Thanksgiving that talks loud? Oh, he's a loud talker, right? But he's constantly talking loud about how good God is. And he just won't be quiet. And you go to work tomorrow and you're in the office and you're like, wow, God's amazing. People peeking over their cubicles at you. Like, what in the world's gotten into that guy? Here's the reality. When you shout, you are conveying a message to another individual or a group of individuals, and you don't care who hears. You are celebrating God. And so we make a joyful shout, or as the older King James says, a noise. Not just any noise, though, a purposeful noise. Right? We celebrate God. We are cheering for God. And in the sports realm, we don't sit up there in the stands and go, right? No golf claps allowed. This is a big deal. It's rah, rah, rah. God is amazing. When we recognize who God is, how awesome God is, and we begin to express it to others, we do so with a shout, with a loud voice, with a boisterous voice. You guys, actually, if ever during a sermon I get a little animated, you like that a lot, and you tell me. Like, wow, you were really feeling it. The difficulty for us is we're too passé about the greatness of God, and we need to develop the action of shouting a lot. I want you to try this, because at Thanksgiving, sometimes at your Thanksgiving, some family members start to shout to each other, right? And let's say you're in the kitchen and you hear your in-laws in the other room and they are just shouting at each other, and you come in and you join them, but instead of shouting normal things, you shout praises to God. And you are so grateful to God. I bet they will stop shouting at each other and look at you like you're an idiot. And you will have made your point that God is amazing. And we are grateful to God. We shout. Verse 2 says we serve. There's two ways to serve, though, right? You can serve grudgingly, or you can serve with gladness. So imagine a slave who gets free and comes home to find out his whole village has been wiped out. And he he finds a group of people living in his village. And what does he do to them? Does he seek revenge upon them? What does he do? He serves them with gladness. He's happy to serve them. He teaches them. He provides for them. He's really the hero of Thanksgiving, in that he didn't have to do any of that. They were the ones who had mistreated him. They were those people, not necessarily the pilgrims, but Europeans. They were the ones who are now living in the house that his brother built. And what does he do? He comes into their presence and begins to serve them, because that's exactly what Jesus did. You remember Jesus, who was in heaven and everything was amazing, and that he made himself of no reputation and took on the form of a servant? And he comes down here, and what's he doing? He's healing people, and he's teaching the poor, and he's washing the feet of these crazy disciples. And it's all about serving, and he does it with gladness and heart. And I wonder if we could do that this week, if we could develop not just an attitude of gratitude, but an action of gratitude where we serve, but not begrudgingly. Can't believe it. You young people, you better take out the trash with a smile on your face this week. Right? Be happy about it. Your mom will think you're on drugs, but it's okay. Serve with gladness. You got to work. I'm not even going to ask you if the rat is making you work on Thanksgiving. He probably is. Do it with, oh my goodness. You want to really be like Christ? That's hardcore. That's extra large gratitude. When you work for the man or the mouse on Thanksgiving Day and you do it with gladness. Then people will look at you and they're like, man, they really are Christian. I didn't think so up until today, but that's over the top. So when we do this and when we shout, I like a little echo. We shout and then we serve with gladness, all of a sudden we are developing some habits of thanksgiving. Look at the next verse. Know that the Lord, He is God. It is He who made us, and not some crazy evolutionary theory. And we are His people and the sheep of His pasture. Again, what is that? That's knowing that God is God. The reason we don't understand, the reason we're not grateful is because we fail to recognize that God is God. This word know here is the same word that's used in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, where it says Adam knew Eve, and she conceived and bore them a son. There is a type of knowledge that is experiential and intimate and close. And one of the ways that we grow in our thankfulness is to know God. To know Him by experience, to know Him at a deeper level. It's not just, I just don't know a little bit about God, but the more I know about God, the more I love Him, the more I am in awe of Him, the more I don't understand why God would die for somebody as sinful as me. It doesn't make any sense that He is so holy and I am so empty and vain and evil. And yet, He gave His everything for me. As we begin to understand this, we nurture thanksgiving in our hearts. And as we nurture thanksgiving in our heart, God begins to reveal His nature to us. And He reveals His nature. Look at verse 4, second half of verse 4. It says, be thankful to Him and bless His name, for the Lord is good, His mercy is everlasting, and His truth endures all generations. God reveals three things about His nature to us. That God is good. We sang that, didn't we? You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. It's your nature. God, you are so good. This is salvation. Our existential need met by His existential gift. Everything of His given to meet our everything. That's the goodness of God. The question is, have you experienced the goodness of God today? You experience the goodness of God when you recognize your need, that I am a sinner, devoid of any ability to save myself, but God, who is so holy, saw fit to love me in my sin. But God proved His love towards me, and that while I was still a sinner, Christ died for me, Romans 5:8. That gospel, that good news. His goodness is revealed, His mercy. You're going to be around family this week, and you're going to be around some people that you got about that much mercy for. The problem is they got about that much mercy for you. But your God, according to Psalm 100, your God's mercy is everlasting. It doesn't run out. God doesn't have a last nerve. Did you mess up? Oh, God's probably angry with me now. No, God's angry at your sin every day, right? So the reality is that He's never going to stop loving you, and that there's always redemption, and that God's mercy is everlasting. And His truth, as Elijah said earlier, His truth endures to all generations. It's this family heirloom that is passed down as you shout truth of thanksgiving, of God's goodness and His mercy. Here's a bunch of pilgrims, a bunch of Native Americans gathered together with an ex-slave. And what are they doing? They are shouting the goodness and the mercy of God in a year where it's been really bad for everybody. He lost his village. He had lost his 10 years of his life. The pilgrims had lost half of their number. And they are thankful because they say this: God's been merciful to us. And God's been good to us. And that's the truth. And it doesn't make sense anymore that a holy and righteous God would give His everything for somebody like me, somebody like you. Let's bow our heads.